No one could quite remember the last time the Hopeville Town Courthouse had been this packed for a juvenile case. The creaky wooden benches groaned under every shift, and the ceiling fan overhead kept spinning slowly, as if it didn't care who was about to be found guilty. At the far end of the room, where a plain defendant's stand was pushed against a patchy wall, a young boy stood, white button-up shirt fastened to the collar, hands unshackled. But the way everyone looked at him, you'd think he'd been guilty the moment he walked through the door. His name was Elijah Kane, 17, black, thin but not weak, deep eyes, straight shoulders, and standing still like a landmark in the middle of a storm. The charges: grand theft auto, evading arrest, and resisting a law enforcement officer. Judge Harold Bowers, old, conservative, known for his no-nonsense approach, sat at the high bench. He tapped the handle of his gavel lightly on the desk. "We're here to try the case of young Elijah Kane. Is the defendant present?" Elijah gave a nod. Silent. The district attorney, Blake Connor, blonde crew cut, dark suit, the kind of stride that looked rehearsed for a debate stage, stepped forward with a faint smirk. "Your Honor, this case is clear as day. The defendant was caught near the scene, less than 2 blocks from the stolen vehicle. Fingerprints on the steering wheel. He ran. Officers positively identified him." Judge Bowers nodded slightly, eyes still scanning the file. "Does the defendant have legal representation?" A woman in her 40s county public defender stood up, her voice low, almost a whisper. I've been assigned to represent the defendant." But Elijah placed a hand, gently yet firmly, on her arm. "Permission to speak, Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and evenly pronounced. "I'll be representing myself." The room fell strangely silent. A half-snorted laugh came from the prosecution's side. Someone in the back rows chuckled. Judge Bowers squinted. "You will defend yourself, yes?" A flicker of surprise. Then the judge leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "Proceed." "Let's see how long this performance lasts." Connor didn't bother hiding his grin. Elijah, on the other hand, didn't smile at all. He simply opened the worn-out folder he'd brought in, pulled out a stack of papers, and locked eyes with the man who'd just laughed at him. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin with a simple request. Verification of Officer Gordon's GPS data, the officer who claimed to have seen me behind the wheel." Bowers furrowed his brow. "On what grounds?" "Because I have reason to believe he wasn't anywhere near the scene at that time. And if that's true, his entire testimony is invalid." Connor shot to his feet. "Objection. Officer Gordon is a veteran witness. The defendant is just trying to derail the trial. I'm only asking for a factual check. Location, no emotions, no opinions, just coordinates." Judge Bowers exhaled. "Request is noted." Prosecution, do you object to verifying the officer's location? Connor hesitated, just for a beat, but it was long enough for a few heads in the room to glance at one another. "No objection." Elijah gave a slight nod. "Good. Then let's start there." And for the first time, in that old wooden courtroom, people stopped looking at Elijah like a kid who didn't belong. They started seeing something else. A lawyer. Not one with a license, but with something they didn't have the truth. And a reason worth living or dying for. To protect it. The case file was thicker than it looked. Elijah knew that, because he had sat up reading every single page the night before. Under the weak yellow light in his grandfather's tiny attic room. Overlapping testimonies, vague descriptions, and most importantly, Officer Gordon's statement didn't line up with the objective facts. In the courtroom, Connor moved on to the next detail: fingerprint evidence. "We have forensic results confirming the defendant's fingerprints were on the steering wheel of the stolen Honda Civic." Elijah nodded, not denying that. A soft murmur rippled through the room. Elijah raised a hand, asking to speak. "Your Honor, I only ask one question." Was the car found about 2 blocks from Malloy's grocery? Yes. And is there a security camera there? Yes. I would like to present footage from that security camera requested last week. Connor jumped to his feet. Objection. Defendant has no authority to obtain this data, Elijah replied calmly. It was provided with the consent of the store owner, Mr. Malloy, who also happens to be the sponsor of the scholarship I'm currently receiving. He kept his eyes on the judge. Bowers sat upright. Play it. A small screen flickered on. In the grainy frame, Elijah and 3 friends were seen walking past the vehicle. Elijah stepped toward it, touched the door, cracked it open, then closed it again. No driving, no theft, no clear criminal act. When the screen went black, the room fell completely silent. Elijah spoke. I was a curious kid. Yes, but curiosity isn't a crime. He turned to the jury. If I walk into a store and touch a shirt on the rack, then walk out without taking anything, and later, someone steals that shirt, are my fingerprints enough to convict me? Connor shuffled through his file, flustered. It's not just the fingerprints. It's the fleeing he ran when officers approached. Elijah nodded. Your Honor, I did run. That's true. Because when I was called back, the officer shouted, "Get on the ground, you little punk." I panicked. Like any 17-year-old black kid growing up in Hopeville would. Silence. And, Elijah added, because my brother Marcus was shot in a similar situation. No weapon, no charges. Just in the wrong place. Judge Bowers stared at Elijah for a long moment, said nothing, but the mocking glint in his eyes from earlier was gone. Connor offered no rebuttal. Elijah lowered his voice, speaking now to everyone in the room. This is no longer a car theft case. This is a case of bias written into the report, stamped with authority, and sent to this court as if it were the truth. Connor was starting to sweat, not from the muggy southern air, but because he was losing control. Testimonies he thought were airtight line by line were being dragged into the light by that teenager, Elijah. Judge Bowers spoke. Do you have a response to the forensic evidence? Yes, Your Honor. Elijah took one step toward the stand. A simple question. Is the fingerprint examiner present today? Connor answered instead, his voice low. Not necessary. We have a certified lab report. Elijah turned to the jury. So I can't cross-examine. Can't ask how the fingerprints were collected. Can't verify whether procedure was followed. Is that what we call a fair trial? He held up the printout from the prosecution's file. This report is signed by someone who isn't here, never reviewed face-to-face. And the car? No interior camera. No eyewitness saw me driving. Connor cut in. You were apprehended near the scene. Nearly half a mile away. Elijah corrected. I was walking. Unarmed. No car keys. No belongings on me. Oh, they threw me to the ground. Cuffed me. And filed in their report that I was non-compliant. Do I appear non-compliant to this court? The judge didn't answer. And Officer Gordon's GPS? Elijah asked. Has that report come back yet? The court clerk handed a sheet to Judge Bowers. He read it. Then looked up, his expression colder than before. Data confirms Officer Gordon was in the district station parking lot at the time he claimed to have witnessed the defendant inside the vehicle. Gasps filled the courtroom. Connor lowered his head. Elijah said nothing. He didn't need to. He took one deep breath, then stood even taller. We don't need a miracle to see this case was built on shaky statements, convenient assumptions, and a system that counted on no one daring to question it. But I did. Because I've already seen what silence gets you in a place like this. The atmosphere in the courtroom was no longer heavy. It was waiting. As if everyone stood on the fragile edge between a conviction and a rewriting of history. Elijah stepped toward the stand and placed his hand on the final file. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to present supplemental evidence that was deliberately omitted from the prosecution's case file. Connor shot to his feet. Objection. The defendant has no right to introduce new evidence at this stage. Judge Bowers shot him a glare. I'll allow it. Proceed, Kane. Elijah pulled out a printed sheet. The original statement from the owner of the vehicle, Mr. Raymond Whitaker. This document was in the initial file, but never made it into the indictment packet. He looked up at Connor. I'm sure the prosecution had their reasons. Connor's jaw clenched. But he said nothing. Elijah began to read aloud. I left the car running while I went into the convenience store. When I came back out, it was gone. I saw a white male, wearing a red hoodie, running away from the scene. The entire courtroom jolted. Someone dropped a pen. A sharp gasp came from the back rows. And Connor, his face went pale, like he'd just swallowed ice. Mr. Whitaker also made it clear, Elijah continued, that the person he saw was not the individual later arrested. He turned to the jury. I'm black, wearing a blue shirt, walking with 3 Latino friends. Connor stammered. You were still caught near the scene, and that's enough to satisfy the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, Elijah asked. When there's a witness statement clearly saying I wasn't the one who took the car. No proof I ever drove it. And the only eyewitness isn't even present here today. Judge Bowers stared at Elijah. No more doubt. No more smirking. Elijah ended with a sentence barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone heard it. Your Honor, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking to be treated like a citizen, like anyone who doesn't have this skin, this background, or grow up in a town where a look can pass for a verdict. Bowers brought the gavel down, one solid strike, then looked up, his voice deeper now with procedural gaps and contradictions in testimony. The court declares the defendant is not guilty. Case dismissed. Silence. No one jumped. No one clapped. That silence, heavy as stone, was what truly moved everyone. Connor bowed his head. Bowers sighed, his gaze lingering on Elijah. As Elijah gathered his papers and stepped down from the stand, Bowers' aged voice called out behind him, Kane. Elijah stopped, but didn't turn around. You should study law. You've got something not everyone in this profession has, a sense of justice and memory. Elijah smiled faintly. I started studying when I was 11. Not in school, my grandfather taught me. He once sat in that same chair, outside. The sky was still gray, like it had been that morning, but in Elijah's eyes, it looked different now. Denise, his mother, stood waiting at the courthouse steps, eyes red-rimmed. You nearly gave me a heart attack, she said, pulling him into a tight hug. I just didn't want anyone else to go through what happened to Marcus, Elijah whispered. There was nothing more to say. Across the street, a police officer, one who'd been involved in Marcus's arrest, looked at Elijah, then turned away, not out of shame, but because for the first time, he knew he was being remembered not by a camera, but by a boy who would never forget a single detail. Not everyone has the power to defend themselves against the system, but sometimes all it takes is one person truly standing tall, with reason and discipline for that system to pause. Look again, and for the first time, listen.